unlike many cults whose beliefs are often mysterious and secretive to everyone but their members, in the case of the IBLP, whose goal was world domination, as Chad Harris described it in Shiny Happy People, their intention was for the beliefs to bleed into society so that the connection back to the cult became indistinguishable. So you might not have ever heard of the IBLP or the Duggars, but you still have likely come into contact with their beliefs, either through the curriculum in your public school, programs in your local government, purity culture teachings that spread into the mainstream, or today, a political climate where right-wing extremists are trying to make what they call biblical truths the law of the land. Welcome to Marketing Muckraking, the show that asks not simply what brand culture can do for us, but what it's doing to us. With your host, creative director, and brand strategist gone wild, Rachael Kay Albers, making fun of business and making business fun. This is the show for rebels, revolutionaries, and renegades who run businesses that burn the rulebook. If you're sick of business podcasts that have all the answers, well, I got nothing but questions. Let's go. Episode 23, 19 Brands and Counting, a muckraker's review of Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. You heard it at the top of the show. This podcast is about exploring not what brand culture can do for us, but what it is doing to us. And the Duggars are the perfect example of how the age of the personal brand allows master manipulators to weaponize modern marketing tools to actively reshape perception and rewrite history as it is happening with tragic consequences. Now, don't worry. If you've never watched 19 Kids and Counting or Shiny Happy People, I'm going to give you the TLDR or the TLDW in this case. And if you're a snarker like me and you're all caught up on Shiny Happy People, this episode is going to cover ground that the docuseries didn't, although fingers crossed for a season 2. I do want to give a content warning because this episode will touch on sensitive topics that include sexual assault, child abuse, and religious trauma. If these themes are painful for you, I encourage you to join me in future episodes. Now, before we rake the muck, a little backstory. Who are the Duggars and why should we care? So you might have first heard about the Duggars from their TLC reality show 19 Kids and Counting, which according to IMDb was a reality show about a Christian homeschooling family with 19 children and how their family functions. The show positioned the Duggars as this wholesome, all-American family with some unconventional quirks like not kissing till the altar, dressing like characters from The Handmaid's Tale, and always being joyfully available to one's husband, whether you like it or not. Because as Michelle Duggar famously said, anyone can make him a sandwich, but only you can satisfy that one special need. You know, just wholesome, quirky rape culture stuff. Sorry, purity culture, as the Duggars would say. Talk about rebranding. The reality behind the reality show is that the Duggars were brand ambassadors for the religious cult known as the IBLP, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which was founded by sexual predator and cult leader Bill Gothard in 1961. The IBLP's teachings centered around authority. Gothard believes, or at least he pretends to, that the decline of American values comes from straying from the belief that God is the ultimate authority, men are the earthly stewards of that authority, and women and children are to stay under this umbrella of protection. Now, the way that this plays out is through rigid purity culture standards that tell women that they are not only to submit to their fathers and then their husbands, but also that their very existence is an inherent threat to men's sexual morality. Hence, the IBLP's strict rules about what women can wear, say, and do, with the underlying understanding that it is a woman's job to protect her brothers in Christ from sexual immorality by not dressing in a way so as to defraud him and lead him to sexual sin. Victim blaming 101. I have a couple of TikToks that go into greater depth on this and why purity culture and rape culture are one and the same. So for more on that, check the show notes. Gothard, whose father was the executive director of Gideon International, the organization responsible for the Bibles that you find in hotel room nightstands, was known as the Dominionist alternative to Dr. Spock. Dominion theology is the teaching that Christians should rule the world, literally. Dominionists believe in Christian nationalism, the idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and should be returned to its roots by putting religion religious leaders in government positions to align the laws of the land with the laws of the Bible. Puts a whole new spin on Make America Great Again, am I right? Or Make America Gilead Again. I think that's more like it. Brooke Arnold described it in Shiny Happy People. 19 Kids and Counting was a PR show for Gothard's teachings. The goal was to use the Duggars as spokescripters for the IBLP to mainstream their extremist beliefs so they could gain political control. To use marketing speak, the Duggars functioned as proof of concept for the IBLP's ideology, softening America's perception of fundamentalism. Many people who watched the Duggars just saw them as wholesome folks with good old American values, which was exactly the point. Position the Duggars as model Americans so that eventually the IBLP could take over America and model it in its own image. And the IBLP has been successful in this. Not only have their members held positions in local, state, and national political office, but they also created secular trainings and curriculums based on Gothard's teachings, most notably the Character First program that is still in use in public schools, law enforcement agencies, federal government agencies, prisons, Fortune 500 countries across the country and the world. Over 200 cities nationwide and in 27 countries around the world have designated themselves as cities of character as part of the IBLP's campaign to spread their teachings into government. Sarah Palin attended an IBLP seminar in 2000 and then made Wasilla, Alaska a character city. At the same time that all of this was happening, in 2014, 34 women came forward to accuse Bill Gothard of sexual harassment and abuse. And in 2015, while eldest son Josh Duggar was working as the executive director of the lobbying arm of the Family Research Council, an evangelical think tank promoting family values, news broke that Josh had sexually abused his own sisters in the early 2000s, which his parents Jim Bob and Michelle covered up so that they could land their TLC show. Later that year, Josh made the news again when his infidelity was revealed as part of the Ashley Madison data breach. And it gets worse. In 2021, Josh Duggar was arrested on charges of possessing child sexual assault imagery. And later that year, he was found guilty and in 2022, sentenced to 12 years in prison. And this is what I meant when I said that the age of the personal brand allows master manipulators to weaponize modern marketing tools to actively reshape public perception and rewrite history as it is happening with tragic consequences. What I think is worth noting here that didn't make it into the Shiny Happy People docuseries is that when Josh abused his sisters in 2002, crimes that his parents actively covered up to preserve the family brand, Jim Bob Duggar was campaigning for U.S. Senate on a platform that rape and incest should be punishable by the death penalty. But what did Jim Bob and Michelle do when they found out that their eldest son was guilty of these crimes? Sent him to an IBLP work camp to do hard labor for a few months. And then, when he returned home, put him front and center on 19 Kids and Counting as an emblem of purity culture. And the show meticulously documented his courtship, engagement, and marriage to his wife, Anna, including a cringeworthy scene where Jim Bob sits Josh down to tell him about the birds and the bees as if this is the first time he's hearing about it. Josh went on to serenade his bride at the altar with the IBLP's loyalty song, where he pledged faithfulness to her in good times and bad. Well, we know how that turned out. When Josh's initial crimes were revealed in 2015, the Duggars appeared on Megyn Kelly, forcing Josh's victims to publicly exonerate him so that their show could continue. 19 Kids and Counting was rebranded to Jill and Jessa Counting On, and the show continued without Josh's involvement until he was arrested in 2021. Not only were Jill and Jessa responsible for protecting their family brand when their family didn't protect them, they weren't paid for most of the time on the show. They were victimized by the cult, victim blamed by the cult, and then forced to be the cult's victors. Bringing this back to marketing muckraking, here's why all of this is important. The Duggars leveraged marketing and PR not only as brand ambassadors of the IBLP cult, but to rebrand the abuse within their own community and family, including with his victims. In other words, good old godly gaslighting. In this episode, I am going to break down the 10 commandments of marketing manipulation, i.e. how the Duggars and the IBLP used modern branding, marketing, and PR to achieve everything I just described, and how we can spot this in the wild, whether it's a cult or a coach or a company. But before I get to that, let me tell you just a little bit about why I am so personally invested in this particular dark side of the age of the personal brand. Now, I was not raised directly in the IBLP. I would describe my own upbringing as fundy light, but my home church was actually down the road from the IBLP's headquarters in Oak Brook, Illinois. I had family who attended Wheaton College, which is Bill Gothard's alma mater and where he originally founded the IBLP. So the IBLP's teachings definitely bled into my own upbringing. For multiple summers, I attended a Jesus camp of sorts. If you've ever seen the documentary by the same name, then you know what I am talking about, where the other kids spoke in tongues and true believers broke down sobbing, asking Jesus into their hearts. The amount of tears that you wept for the Lord was considered like a status symbol in this culture. This was actually how I got saved at the time. I remember looking around this football field of thousands of other kids crying out to God to save them from hell. And I knew that if I didn't join them, well, they would make my life a living hell on earth. So there I was, sobbing on the lawn for the Lord. All my church friends got purity rings. I did not. And I think this is because my own parents considered me to be damaged goods at a young age. They once accused me of trying to seduce a grown man when I was 7 years old. Sound familiar? By the time that I got to my early 20s, I was convinced that all the harm that had befallen me in my life was the result of having had sex before marriage. At one point, I even pledged myself to be a born-again virgin to earn back God's favor, and then I deconstructed. And that's just a small part of a much bigger story on how RKA became a muckraker. Flash forward to today, I'm nearing 40 and I am still actively deconstructing how purity culture and religious trauma continues to affect how I see myself and relate to the world around me. I'm sharing some of my story in this episode because unlike many cults whose beliefs are often mysterious and secretive to everyone but their members, in the case of the IBLP, whose goal was world domination, as Chad Harris described it in Shiny Happy People, their intention was for the beliefs to bleed into society so that the connection back to the cult became indistinguishable. So you might not have ever heard of the IBLP or the Duggars, but you still have likely come into contact with their beliefs, either through the curriculum in your public school, programs in your local government, purity culture teachings that spread into the mainstream, or today, a political climate where right-wing extremists are trying to make what they call biblical truths the law of the land. So how did they do it? Let's break down the 10 commandments of marketing manipulation so you can spot this shit in the wild, whether it's a cult, a coach, or a company. The first commandment, thou shalt build a personal brand. So the Duggars were recruited to be the human faces of the IBLP brand. As writer and marketing expert Onicia Muller puts it, the Duggars were the IBLP's proof of concept. We naturally tend to look at people with less scrutiny than we do with companies or organizations. So personal branding was the perfect vehicle for mainstreaming the IBLP's ideology. Fall in love with this wholesome American family and you won't be as quick to examine their ideas. And this makes it harder for you to believe that they are harmful even when presented with glaring evidence, as happened in 2015 when news of Josh Duggar's abuses came to light. We just don't look at personal brands with the same skepticism and eye for accountability that we do a corporation or organization. We don't demand financial liability or corporate responsibility from a Tony Robbins, a Rachel Hollis, a Kim Kardashian the way we would a Nike, a McDonald's, or a Coca-Cola. And the more human a corporation becomes, the less we analyze its impact or expect accountability. Well, they're just people like you and me. Do you want to destroy their livelihood? The layers of the Duggar branding run deep because one, they are a family brand and a brand family. The Duggars themselves are a brand, and each of their kids is a personal brand, hence the title of this episode, 19 Brands and Counting. 2, they were brand ambassadors for the IBLP. And 3, they actively rebranded abuse within their own family and community so that when it happened, members wouldn't be able to name it because they had been gaslit into believing that it was their fault. The second commandment, Thou shalt agitate pain points and promise a magic cure. The IBLP rose to success by agitating the pain point that many white conservative American families felt, seeing their power and privilege diminish in the wake of the civil rights movement. Of course, Gothard never used those words. He used dog whistles like family values, and he spoke to the right wing's desire to take back the nation. And he then sold seminars as the quick fix to what ailed his audiences. Speaking to a stadium of people, Gothard told them, "One of the joys of being here this week is knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have for every one of you the answer." The 1988 video introduction to the IBLP Basic Seminar features members saying, "Our lives were falling apart around us. The Institute saved my life. That first night that Mr. Gothard spoke, I just wept." Added Michelle Duggar's testimonial, "We gave our life to God and he just kept blessing us." And these read like testimonials on a sales page for whatever huckster du jour happens to be in the spotlight today. Most recently, it was Matthew McConaughey who has linked arms with Tiny Tony Robbins and Uncle Dean Graziosi in their latest ClickFunnels grift. Yes, Matthew McConaughey is a life coach now, so you know the apocalypse is nigh. And the first sentence of the trailer on the sales page for his Highway to More road trip program, only 4 easy payments of $150, is, "How do you want to be introduced when you're gone?" Ain't no greater pain point than facing your own mortality, am I right? Well, compare this to one of Bill Gothard's speeches. "When you get to the end of your life, what do you want to be able to look back and say, this is what God accomplished through my life?" The IBLP stirred up fear and then offered a cure. If you're afraid that your family and the nation are going to hell in a handbasket, well, have we got something for you? Only 4 easy payments of your life, agency, dignity, and the safety of your children. The third commandment, thou shalt fake it till you make it. Good old Jim Bob and Michelle toured the country giving seminars on raising godly, obedient children, all while they were actively covering up their son Josh's crimes. And Bill Gothard has never married and has no children, but he built an empire teaching others how to do so successfully, all while his followers repeatedly failed to implement his teachings. But in both cases, the branded veneer of success, validated by a wildly popular reality show, was enough to convince the world that these imposters were the real deal. In the age of the personal brand, the rule is perception is reality. This is how Rachel Hollis and Dave Hollis sold high-end marriage retreats when their own marriage was falling apart. This is how Elizabeth Holmes secured nearly $1 billion in funding for technology that never existed, endangering people's lives in the process. It's how Anna Delvey conned her way through New York high society. It's how Billy McFarland sold 5,000 tickets to Firefest, a music festival that he knew would never happen, destroying countless small businesses in the process, taking his friends down with him. This is what I meant when I said at the top of the show that when personal branding is used as a tool to reshape public perception and rewrite history as it's happening, it can lead to tragic, disastrous consequences. The fourth commandment, thou shalt ride the cultural moment. If I will give Bill Gothard any credit, and it's this much, it is his strategic ability to take a free ride on a cultural moment. Over the past 50 or so years, brands have typically been among the first to respond to culture shifts by advertising themselves as the change that the world needs, even and especially when their behind-the-scenes practices are anything but. Naomi Klein describes this in No Logo when she writes about how during the political correctness wars of the 90s, brands spent money not to address underlying social and economic injustices that their companies were causing, but on ads depicting a unified, multicultural, global village. These ads created a mirage of progress. If you were an alien from outer space gleaning your understanding of the world purely from the advertisements of the day, you would think we were a technicolor utopia of diversity and inclusion. In an essay for The Nation, Max Blumenthal writes that Gothard first grew popular during the 1960s by marketing his program to worried evangelical parents as anti-hippie insurance for adolescent children. The IBLP's very existence was a response to a cultural moment, only instead of selling the illusion of progress, Gothard sold his teachings as a return to the good old days, during a time when conservative white Americans saw their power and control slipping. The fifth commandment, thou shalt sell nostalgia for a non-existent time. Bill Gothard was selling MAGA before MAGA existed. Make America Gilead again. In Shiny Happy People, sociologist Danielle Lindemann describes this as hearkening back to some imagined pastime where things were simpler and roles were more clearly defined. Only this bygone time that Gothard and the Duggars show harken back to never existed to begin with. And this marketing strategy is not new. Nostalgia sells better than sex. When brands first came on the scene in the 19th century, consumers weren't used to buying from companies, so they resisted advertising claims until they were cajoled into lowering their defenses. Early brands built trust by summoning up images of life before industrialization, often with old, wise, grandmotherly figures that sold the promise of simpler times. In reality, life was anything but simple before and after the Industrial Revolution. These better days were a figment of the collective imagination that advertisements made come true, almost like the reverse effect of fake it till you make it. And this practice has never gone out of style. It's what kept advertisers afloat during World War I and World War II when Americans were anxious about how war was changing the nation and the world. Advertisers leaned into ads portraying the quality of life that Americans were told that they were fighting for. And many of those World War II era ads depicting an ideal suburban family life that was at best a caricature of a tiny fraction of the country's reality still get dredged up today by conservatives like Gothard as proof that we've lost our way. Fundamentalist influencers of the day often use these very advertising images unironically in their Instagram reels and TikToks, unaware that these portraits of American life once upon a time were manufactured by marketers to sell products. And in the IBLP's case, the product that they were selling was the patriarchy. The sixth commandment, thou shalt clickbait and switch. If nostalgia sells better than sex, so does sensationalism. The Duggars captured the national attention because the concept of one family having nearly 20 children boggled the average American's mind. Some of the very first examples of successful American ad campaigns came from P.T. Barnum, who drew massive crowds eager to see his 19th century freak shows. The bearded lady, the four-legged girl, the human skeleton, the 19 kids and counting. Over time, freak shows gave way to tabloids, which gave way to reality TV and clickbait. Early Duggar viewers tuned in to just peer behind the scenes of a modern-day sideshow. And then TLC gave them the old clickbait and switch. They drew them in based on their morbid curiosity, and then they shocked them and ultimately endeared viewers with the family's perceived wholesomeness. Notably, Jim Bob and Michelle released a statement the day after Shiny Happy People released, critiquing the docuseries for the very thing that got them on TV in the first place. They wrote, "This documentary paints so much and so many in a derogatory and sensationalized way because sadly that's the direction of entertainment these days." Yeah, it's the direction that paid for your house. The seventh commandment, thou shalt build your funnel. Shiny Happy People is replete with marketing language, and this is no accident. In episode 1, Josh Peace says they turned every father into a cult leader and franchised spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological abuse. There's one F word, franchise. But then Alex Harris goes on to say the goal was to funnel Christian homeschoolers into positions of influence in government. That's the second F word, funnels. Looking at the Duggars as part of one big IBLP marketing funnel, 19 Kids and Counting was the lead magnet. And the end of the funnel was not simply converting viewers into evangelists for the Duggars family values ideology, but converting views into votes. The Duggars used their platform to campaign for Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, and their fame opened the door for Josh Duggar to become executive director of the DC lobbying wing of the Family Research Council, just to name a few examples. The eighth commandment, thou shalt grow your downline. The whole business model of network marketing, otherwise known as multi-level marketing, hinges on a company's ability to skirt the cost of advertising by relying on individual sellers to do the advertising for them to their own network of family and friends. Now, in this case, Michelle Duggar gave birth to her own downline, and TLC gave her and Jim Bob's 19 brands and counting a parasocial audience of millions of friends to sell the IBLP to. And also in the Duggar downline were their friends, the Bates family, another IBLP clan of 19 kids who were first featured on the show, and then they got a TLC show of their own, the United Bates of America, before they found a more permanent home at Up TV with their show Bringing Up Bates, which lasted 10 seasons. Now, many people see the Bates as the kinder, gentler version of the Duggars, but let me set the record straight. Gil Bates is one of the most powerful leaders in the IBLP today, and he was named as a defendant in the 2015 lawsuit against the IBLP for covering up years of sexual assault allegations. As the Duggars sold America on a new way of life, they recruited a whole new generation of fundamentalist network marketers like the Plaths of TLC's Welcome to Plathville, Bethany Beal and Kristen Clark of Girl Defined, who I lovingly refer to as the mothers of modern purity culture, Jill Rodriguez, Pollen Morgan Olliges, Carissa Collins, the list goes on and on. Of course, the calling card of network marketing is that its peddlers will vehemently deny that they are doing network marketing. And if you look into any of the funnies that I just mentioned and their reaction to shiny happy people, you'll see them doing just that. The 9th commandment, thou shalt pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Just as the hucksters of online marketing blame their customers for a failure to achieve promised results on having a scarcity mindset or not putting in the work, God's grifters teach their audience that misfortune is a result of sinfulness and not crying out to God. This is also how abuse gets rebranded within the IBLP inner circle. Women like Anna Duggar are blamed for their husband's infidelity, and in Josh's case, sexual crimes for not being joyfully available enough. Sexual assault victims are blamed for what they wore or not fighting back hard enough. In 2016, Jill Simmons, one of Bill Gothard's victims, described to the New York Daily News how she was abused by Gothard after being sent to stay with him when she spoke up about being assaulted by another IBLP man. She said, he would tell me that it was my fault that I was assaulted, and he would ask God to cleanse me. Gothard told her that her failure to fight back meant that she was just as guilty as the man who assaulted her. Not only is this victim blaming, not only is this awful, it's the Christian fundamentalist version of telling people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Your pain, according to the IBLP ideology, isn't the result of systemic abuse. It's a function of your faithfulness or lack thereof. If you are suffering, you don't need support, advocacy, protection. You need prayer. You need a mindset shift. You need to get out of that scarcity mentality. The 10th commandment. Thou shalt die to self. Everything I just described in the first 9 commandments of marketing manipulation is meant to do one thing: override your agency and get you to make decisions from a place of emotion and urgency instead of intuition. This is the key to quickly scaling a business and quickly scaling a cult. Create a message that's louder than your audience's inner voice and keep shouting until they can't hear themselves think. The IBLP succeeded in franchising spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological abuse, as Josh Peace described it, by teaching their followers to surrender their own agency for the authority of God. This is often phrased in the church as dying to self. Followers are told to disregard their own feelings, needs, discomforts, and die to self to fully live their faith. One of the IBLP's commands reads, "Suffering for Jesus is not easy. It requires us to die to self and embrace the selfless nature of Jesus. God's goodness and grace is then seen through us, and this becomes a tangible testimony of God's love to those reviling and persecuting us." In other words, God rewards suffering if you will submit everything, including your mind, to earn his love. And if a little voice inside you tells you that something doesn't feel right, that's not you. It's the devil. There you have it, the 10 commandments of marketing manipulation. Thou shalt build a personal brand. Thou shalt agitate pain points and promise a magic cure. Thou shalt fake it till you make it. Thou shalt ride the cultural moment. Thou shalt sell nostalgia for a non-existent time. Thou shalt clickbait and switch. Thou shalt build your funnel. Thou shalt grow your downline. Thou shalt pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Thou shalt die to self. So where does this leave us? In the case of the Duggars and the IBLP, the story is far from over. Because it wasn't really about the Duggars to begin with, was it? In this way, Shiny Happy People itself was a bit of a clickbait and switch. Come for the Duggars, stay for the threats to democracy. The IBLP's goal was to raise up an army that would spread the message to the far corners of the world to the point that its origins became imperceptible. Its teachings have spread into homes, schools, and governments across the planet until we can't even recognize where they came from anymore. But make no mistake, the culture wars that we're seeing waged in the USA and beyond, the assaults on human rights, LGBTQ plus individuals and their families, reproductive health, education, the rise in extremist violence have been aided and abetted by the IBLP and their army of zealots. The hope of this docuseries is that it will allow us to do the opposite of die to self, but to recognize when we see these ideas and practices in the wild and learn how to resist them. To remember that when we see the far right invoke family values or protecting kids or making America great again, they are simply following the commandments, agitating pain points, promising a magic cure, riding a cultural moment, selling nostalgia for a non-existing time, and asking America to die to self out of obedience to a God that they have made in their own image. But that's just no way to love your neighbor. Love isn't pain. Love isn't persecution. Love is kind. Love is love. And I say, we show them how it's done. If you want more marketing muckraking and brand strategy gone wild, I invite you to subscribe to this show. And if you enjoyed it, leave me a review. That really helps me out. If you hated it, please send it to your enemies. They sound like good people. You can go to rachaelkayalbers.com/subscribe to get these updates in your inbox. And because this show is self-sponsored, if you wanted to support my work, you can go to buymearobe.com. That's where the magic happens. In the meantime, remember, it's not the age of the niche, it's the age of the wildcard bitch. See you on the internet.